Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy AAR20 yet again, filling in for the Flying Bird on the Flying Bird channel, of course. We're here bringing you guys PGL Week 3 versus GrimWho, coach of the Motown Marowaks. This week, Bird has brought a very, very peculiar team that I'll get into in a moment, versus his opponent, I should say. So before I get into Bird's sets, his opponent did bring a Entei, Dusclops, Toxapex, Megaseptile, Snorlax, and the Mandibuzz. So, first things first, I'll go into Bird's team. Unlike his IB game, I know a little bit of a reason Bird brought what he did, but there still isn't exactly a lot that I know of in terms of why, at least for most of these. But I know Bird brought at the very least one. First up was the defensive Greninja he brought this week with Spikes, Toxic Taunt, and Dark Pulse with Darkinium Z. I believe the Darkinium Z was just to ensure that he could break Dusclops really easily, especially if it was like a SPDF set. But I honestly don't know what much the investment does. All I have here is the numbers, and that's really it. He also has a sub freeze-dried Dusclops that also, not Dusclops, Cryogonal with Haze and Recover as well in his spread. Again, not really sure what it was meant to do, just that he brought it. He brought a sub Honeclaw's Druddigon that also has Dragon Tail and Earthquake. Pretty sure that he had Dragon Tail on here mainly for like Megaseptile if he was behind his sub, as I'm sure that does a lot. Also because potential, let's say, SD Megaseptile, or really any other setup mon, especially like a Curslax, that could be a really big threat for Bird's team. But luckily for him, with the Druddigon, of course, having Rough Skin, it can take on Snorlax pretty well, assuming it's not ridiculously set up. He also has a Mega Scizor, of course, aka Kaz, with Knockoff, U-Turn, Roost, and Defog. He really didn't need like any sort of Steel move this week. I'm pretty sure that Grim didn't even have a Fairy, if I'm not mistaken. I know at the very least he doesn't in this matchup. And as you see with this team, Bullet Punch really wouldn't have helped with much at all. The only thing that it would have remotely helped with in terms of speed-wise would maybe be like the Megaseptile, if anything. But he'd probably just be better off clicking U-Turn, or just switching out as Megaseptile with HP Fire would do a fair amount. Bird also brought a Banded Tapu Koko with U-Turn, Thunder Punch, Air Release, and Wild Charge. And finally, he brought Daniki the Necrozma with Stealth Rock, Photon Geyser, Charge Beam, and Moonlight. So right off the bat, as you can see, his opponent leads off with Entei. I'm not really sure why at all Entei would be a lead versus this team. I don't really see anything that Entei really helps with in terms of lead match besides maybe like Cryogonal. But again, Cryogonal would never really be a lead. I guess maybe lead Mega Scizor if anything. But again, Greninja lead I feel like was just really free for Bird here, as it does allow him to get up his spikes. If he goes for the taunt, let's say, for example, against any other lead, that's really beneficial too, as it'll stop hazards from getting up from his opponent, or let's say, for example, like a Toxic Spikes from Toxapex. As I think that might actually be his only form of hazards, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, yeah, that would be his only form of hazards. But it also does help with things like Dusclops, for example. And Bird actually makes a really smart play here, just going for turn 1 Darkinium Z. Probably anticipating that Dusclops would be the best switch to Greninja. I'm not really sure why Dusclops was the switch in personally, but I guess it would probably be to preserve HP on Megaseptile in case of, let's say, an Ice Beam prediction, as this would have also nuked through Megaseptile. And not only that, but also this is probably the only mon in the team that, besides like Mandibuzz, that could live a hit. But Mandibuzz versus Greninja really doesn't do anything. At the very least, Dusclops, I guess, would have been able to go for, let's say, Destiny Bond, or at the very least could have went for, as you'll see in a moment, he actually goes for Charge Beam. I'm not sure if that was predicting a potential taunt or anything, or just he was planning on sacking at this point, as he would most likely die with another Dark Pulse. But I think it was probably just predicting a taunt, I guess, because he does switch out here, knowing he had 100% died to Dark Pulse. So I think that might have been what he was predicting, or maybe predicting a low kick, potentially, for Snorlax. But seeing the Bird has already burned through Dark Pulse and Taunt, I think that's why he went into Snorlax here. And lucky for Bird, he does get off a Toxic here, which is actually really beneficial, as this ends up being a Curslax later on. And you'll see, of course, from here, he goes for Curse, which means that most likely he is probably going to be a Gluttony set with Berry. And as you'll see in a moment, he's actually going to also take the Toxic damage, which does prove to Bird that he is in fact either Gluttony or Thick Fat. And when you're running Curse and Snorlax, you're really only running Gluttony, unless if you're running Immunity trying to not get Toxic stalled. But in most cases than not, you're running Gluttony on a Curslax. So I think it's proved to Bird, though, that he had put the Snorlax on the timer. And going hard in Mega Scizor, this does allow him to, one, take any sort of normal type hit, which Greninja obviously would not have at +1. But it does also allow Bird to actually go for a knockoff here pretty freely, as he was, of course, able to get Mega Scizor really free. And there's no possible way in hell a -1 speed Snorlax, hell, even a non-speed boosted Snorlax would have ended up outspeeding Mega Scizor. So the knockoff is 100% guaranteed here. Luckily for Bird, he ends up living his Fire Punch. I'm not really sure how, if I'm being completely honest, but he managed to, so shoutouts to Bird, of course, on that. Must have been all the physical defensive EVs on the Mega Scizor. But somehow he lives a +1 Fire Punch from a Snorlax, so he is able to, of course, U-turn out here pretty freely and go into Danicki, the Necrozma. This should chew through any sort of Fire Punch or even a Facade at +1. However, his opponent decides to go for Recycle, so I'm not really sure if he just didn't know how Recycle mechanics worked. But it ends up really biting him in the butt because he does now lose any sort of chance to go for a Facade here, or have had went for a Facade there, because that would have also killed the Mega Scizor as well. So Danicki does get a free Stealth Rocks here, as it should live any hit from the Mandibuzz, and the Rocks will of course help with a lot of things such as Entei. It helps with Pex getting less than regen, and of course with Bird being able to Hazard Sack pretty freely with this plus Greninja versus the roster, with Mandibuzz being the only sort of removal that his opponent actually has. This is actually looking really good for Bird already, because Dusclop's pretty weak, Snorlax has been killed off, and Greninja actually does a lot at this point now, because not a lot actually really pressures Greninja besides like the Mega Sceptile. As you can see, the Foul Play from Mandibuzz really doesn't do any sort of damage, and Bird is now able to go for a pretty free Taunt here. Taunt should allow Bird to get off a Toxic next turn, and then that also stops Mandibuzz from going for something like, let's say, Roost. Also preserves Greninja longer, as his opponent was not able to have gotten off the Toxic, which is very beneficial. And his opponent now decides to go into Toxapex. So I think this was a really solid prediction on his opponent's part, because this would stop potential Toxic on Mandibuzz. However, Bird plays around this really well and actually goes for Spikes. Spikes will pressure a lot of switch-ins later on, such as Entei, who's already taking a fair amount from Rocks, and also Mega Sceptile, who could also be a potential mon that could do a lot of damage to Bird's team later on. Bird decides to go into Cryogonal on this Toxapex, which I think was a very smart play. However, his opponent also decided to play around it and go into Mandibuzz for some reason. It doesn't really work out because both are still going to be weak to Cryogonal. I don't know what his opponent really thought would happen, because even if Bird stayed in, he got up another layer of Spikes really freely. Toxapex could have at least gone off Toxic, I'm guessing. But Freeze Dry should still do a substantial amount to the Mandibuzz, as you'll see here. But his opponent decides to go for Hidden Power. Again, not sure why he stayed in on a Cryogonal of all things, especially when Foul Play wouldn't do any damage because Cryogonal has no physical attack. This Hidden Power doesn't do any damage because Cryogonal has insane special defense. And again, it forces him to switch out yet again. So his opponent's going to go into Entei here. I think that Bird actually played around this really well in my opinion, because with the Entei taking both Rocks and Spikes damage, Bird now also has a free opportunity to scout what his opponent's going to go for by getting up the Substitute here, of course. And this actually puts Bird in a really solid position in my opinion, because Bird now knows from this turn that Entei is Scarfed and is going to outspeed the rest of his team, assuming non-Scarfers that is. So Bird now does have a solid way to play around this Entei. Not only that, but it does give Bird a free turn of Freeze Dry, which of course does now mean that Entei only has one more chance to actually switch in before it just dies to hazards. So all this is really good knowledge for Bird later on, and knowing that he is a Scarfed Entei, this does allow a really free switch into 3-foot hacks here. 3-foot hacks, of course, the god himself of draft format, going to be able to put in the finest of work versus versus GrimWho's roster. My bad, I was thinking of Leo because it's Druddigon, of course, but 3-foot hacks here, despite being burned, is still going to be able to put in a lot of work, because Entei can't really touch it, so this does allow Bird a free turn of doing whatever he decides to. Good Luck comes in here, which really doesn't matter, because Toxapex can't exactly do anything now that the Druddigon is burned, of course. All it can really do is set up Toxic Spikes, for example, but 3-foot hacks luckily is able to get up a Substitute here, which is actually really nice, because this does allow 3-foot hacks a little bit more leeway in terms of not having to worry about, let's say, really just taking any sort of damage. Does allow for potential things such as avoiding Ice Beam damage. However, his opponent's Toxapex does not carry Ice Beam this week and only goes for the Scald, which shouldn't break a Substitute by any sort of the way, or any sort of definition, I guess. This Druddigon easily lives and is able to go for a pretty free Dragon Tail here, which while Pex is going to be able to get up to full, they should bait in something like, let's say, the Entei or the Mandibuzz, who really don't want to take hazard damage. He ends up baiting instead the Mega Sceptile, which is perfectly fine because Bird does still have his Substitute up. This will allow Bird one free turn on the Mega Sceptile, which otherwise he would not have had he not gone for the Substitute earlier on. So, despite being burned, and despite, of course, having his attack cut in half, because of the burn, he is still able to get off a Dragon Tail here pretty freely versus this Mega Sceptile, who, no matter what it clicks, of course, is not going to be able to do any actual damage. All it will do is just break through the sub. Dragon Pulse goes off here. I'm sure this was a fairly obvious play to Bird, as it's probably his only way to actually break through a sub, and had Bird click Dragon Tail here, of course, then Mega Sceptile is, of course, let's say if it went for a Swords Dance, then it's not getting anything for this turn. In fact, it's just losing HP for no reason. So Bird does get off this Dragon Tail here. Had Bird not gotten burned, that would have actually killed the Mega Sceptile upon next re-entry to Hazards because of the double damage that it would have taken because of not being burned from the Dredagon, that is. This Mandibuzz does come in here, and Mandibuzz is in a pretty bad position now, because Mandibuzz either has to click Roost, and that means that rocks are still up, and that means more Mons are going to just continue to die, or Mandibuzz clicks Defog and then dies to a Dragon Tail. So Mandibuzz decides to click Roost here. Perfectly fine for Bird, of course, as Bird already has the Hazards up, and this does put Bird in a really solid position for later on. And Bird just decides to go for a Dragon Tail. So again, that means more check on the Mega Sceptile or the Entei or really whatever comes in. The Mega Sceptile, of course, is what ends up coming in, and it's going to take some Spikes damage plus some Rocks damage, which is really beneficial for Bird, of course. The Mega Sceptile can no longer come in on Hazards, which is great for Bird, as now the Entei are both pretty useless, and Mandibuzz is essentially fodder to Coco whenever it decides to come in. So Bird has had enough shenanigans of just clicking Dragon Tail. He knows that 3-foot Hax's time is up for this game. He needs to go to bed now. So he's putting 3-foot Hax to rest, of course, by sacking it to Mega Sceptile, which is perfectly fine as Randy is able to come in, and Randy's going to be able to put in the finest of work versus this Mega Sceptile. As no matter what this Mega Sceptile clicks, it's going to guarantee be able to live a hit from any sort of Mega Sceptile shenanigans, as we have seen that is most likely special, if not mixed. And as you can see here, the Giga Drain is not enough to kill. Barely does any damage. He would have needed to click Leaf Storm to actually do anything. But had his opponent click Leaf Storm here, then that would have been really easy for Bird to play around. Bird luckily is able to get off a really solid Banded U-turn. This would have gained momentum no matter what Mon actually came in, so no matter what, this was a very free play. A lot of things would have died to Hazards plus a U-turn there. So Bird is allowed to bring in Daniki now, as no matter what his opponent goes into, it's pretty free for Daniki at this point, because if, let's say, Mandibuzz comes in, he easily has switched into that, or could just click a Charge Beam here. If anything else comes in, it's not going to exactly appreciate taking a Photon Geyser. So Bird here decides to just click Charge Beam, however his opponent decides to avoid the attack like a true player, using RNG to his advantage, and clicks Roost here. Now, had his opponent taken that Charge Beam, that certainly would have killed, I'm sure of it, between the Electric Train boost and the fact that Daniki is, of course, a fairly offensive Mon, based 127 special attack, I think. That's nothing to mess around with, especially when you are boosting from the terrain, of course, and fighting a Mon that would be super effective against. Mandibuzz is, however, no longer in range of a Charge Beam, so Bird decides to go out into Cause and chew through any sort of foul play or whatever shenanigans that Bird would have had to take from Necrozma. He's able to take them perfectly fine with Cause, the Greninja. So, having Greninja in here, of course, this does allow Bird a free opportunity to get Toxic the Mandibuzz. This does essentially put any chance that his opponent has to rest, in my opinion. As with the Mandibuzz being Toxic, this now does put Mandibuzz on a timer, and that's sort of the last wall left. Entei dies upon one more, within one more entry of Hazards. Entei is essentially useless. Mega Sceptile dies to Hazards. Mandibuzz is essentially on a timer now, and I completely forget what other Mons that Grim still has, but, oh yeah, Dusclops. Dusclops is also pretty much written off at this point in the game, and I believe that would be it. So, Bird has decided, of course, to get up another layer of Spikes. This is pretty nice. Oh wait, no, Dusclops already died. It was I think it was Dusclops that already died. He has Toxapex, I think, left, if I'm not mistaken. Point being, though, is that his opponent's roster is essentially just getting Hazard stacked on, and at this point, everything is just fodder to Banded Coco, because nothing really wants to take a Banded Thunder Punch now that Mega Sceptile dies to Hazards, and everything else just really would not want to take a Banded hit from a Tapu Koko. Especially with the terrain up, of course, it's very threatening for his opponent's roster. So Bird is just going to get up more Hazards here. This will, of course, stop Entei from being able to come in at all, because Bird now does have 3 layers of Spikes, if I'm not mistaken. And sacking Cause at this point is really not any detriment to Bird at all, because not having Greninja around really doesn't hurt Bird at all, because everything that Greninja was meant to do is meant to Toxic all the walls, get up Spikes, and be a nuisance for things like the Dusclops, for example. And all of those things did pretty well. So now Randy can come in, and Randy can just fire off 3 Thunder Punches from Banded Tapu Koko, of course, as those are going to really hurt. Base 115 physical attack along with the terrain boost and the Choice Band boost. That's essentially a 2x boost upon all the weakness hits from, let's say, the Mandibuzz, and everything else is going to want to end up having to take Thunder Punch. Oh wait, Dusclops is dead, so then, oh wait, no, Mega Sceptile died to U-turn, that's right. So, point being though, Dusclops is still dead anyway to Hazards. The Entei is, of course, not going to appreciate a Thunder Punch, or let alone the Hazards, actually. I don't know how Entei would possibly live a hit after the Hazards, to be honest. Or literally live through the Hazards, I should say. Because as you can see here, yeah, Entei is going to actually die to Spikes plus Rocks. So that's even better for Bird. That means he doesn't have to switch around anything, of course, as Scarfente would have been able to outspeed and Sacred Fire would have done a ton of damage. So now it's just the Toxapex and a Mandibuzz, and I don't know how his opponent actually expects to live a Banded Thunder Punch with either of those. To be fair, Bird hasn't revealed necessarily that he might be banded, but of course, his opponent, there's no way that he could expect to live any sort of Electric Terrain boosting hits from Tapu Koko. So Pex, of course, goes down, and now the Mandibuzz comes in, and this is the last mon that just needs to die, of course. Mandibuzz should be at around half HP, and there's no way that it can possibly live through a Banded Thunder Punch. So Bird at this point has luckily won the game. This was a very, very solid win for Bird, I feel like. I believe this puts him at 2-1, if I'm not mistaken. So, very good game to his opponent, of course, GrimWho. Make sure to check him out along with everyone else in the PGL, link down in the description below. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the Flying Bird. He makes great content. He should be back next week, if I'm not mistaken, if not in the week after. I'm not sure if he was away for just 1 week or 2 on the regional trip. I just know that he's having a fun time out with the boys of the PDE crew. So until then, one of us will see you next time. Peace out.